right. So last week we watched part 1, and this part 2 will go into a couple other species. Um, so A Natural History of Dragons, Draconology Part 2.
This voyage is sponsored by Wondrium. More about them near the midpoint of our journey. The mighty dragon, a majestic force of nature once considered to be mere myth, a product of fantastic imaginations and perhaps less enlightened ancient cultures. But as we saw in the first half of our journey, dragons are very real, and they inhabit nearly every landmass in this alternate world. They even stalk the deep water. Before our brief intermission, I promised that we'd be exploring even more of these fascinating and stunning beasts, and it's a promise I intend to keep. But to truly understand the dragon's place in this world, we need to understand where they came from. Settle back and enjoy the ride, dear traveler, as we embark on part 2 of our mission to explore the spectacular world of Draconology.
They have a werewolf one too I want to watch.
The Permian was a time of great change, where one world ended and another began. In the aftermath of the chaotic Capitanian extinction, the planet had barely begun to recover when the prelude to a far more devastating extinction began to materialize. Life forms of every shape and size were faced with two choices: adapt or die. The para-reptiles, among others, were dealt a heavy blow from which they would never fully recover. But even as the devastating Great Dying loomed on the horizon, there appeared a para-reptilian lineage that would go on to conquer an increasingly hellish world. Arising amid fire and brimstone, it would take on the most destructive traits of its environment, and its descendants would mold it into one of the most devastating biological weapons the world had ever witnessed. As of right now, the exact origins of the Draconomorpha are not precisely understood. By the end of the Capitanian extinction, the earliest Draconiforms and Serpentiforms were the only surviving Draconomorph lineages. Among other things, they were characterized by a unique respiratory mechanism. Their abdominal ribs, or gastralia, acted as a bellows to pump air in and out of their lungs, effectively allowing them to breathe even while walking, unlike the majority of their cousins.
Oh, Hero, this is a mockumentary. Like, the flying, fire-breathing dragons that are in myth are not. The closest thing to a dragon, I imagine, would be the dinosaurs, but this is a mockumentary, Hero. This isn't real. Yeah, Bridges. Oh yeah, vampires, totally real. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, dinosaurs were. I personally feel like a lot of I feel like a lot of dragon mythology is based off of fossils that people found, so that's probably where the myth came from. Like, let's say you find a T-Rex skull. It's not like people didn't know what skeletons were. People knew. They saw that and they thought, what the fuck? You know what I mean? If I didn't know about fossils, let's say it's like 2,000 years ago, and all of a sudden you find this gigantic skeleton of a dinosaur. Yeah, I mean, you would think something similar. You'd be like, what the hell is this? Dragons. Becomes myth. Also, a lot of these things, a lot of people were putting skeletons together incorrectly and like creating their own monstrosities from it. Saying Jesus was a T-Rex? Absolutely. Actually, no. No, Jesus was a raptor. Remember Raptor Jesus? I remember Raptor Jesus. One of the early memes. Yo, memes have come a long way. I remember when memes were like, the fucking, wolf. Remember what was like Anger Wolf or something? A really angry wolf. And then there was Velociraptor. And, oh god, VOD sponsored by the year 2012, for real. God, those were dark days. Those were really dark days. Oh my goodness. In England, we have a guy called George, and we made him our national saint for killing a dragon, so he must be real true. Yeah, but there's the funny thing is that people thought that they were funny at the time. People liked it at the time. Socially awkward penguin. Rar. Lol, I'm so random. OMG, random. Oh, uwu. Uwu's a new thing, actually. Newer. I don't think uwu was a thing back then, but it would have been huge. Uwu rar? Could you imagine the chaos that uwu rar would have caused on humanity? Glumps you. Okay, alright, alright. I'm trying to eat over here and enjoy my coffee. Oh my god. Oh, okay. I'm just gonna come out and straight up say it. When people say, like, when they LARP in my chat, it is the weirdest thing. Like, oh, snuggles you. Like, I'm just like, yo, bro. What? No, I'm not LARPing with you, man. We're not doing this. We're not doing this. Oh. Or like pats on the head. No, it's alright, it's a history lesson. We're going into history. Oh god, back to the dragons.
As we saw previously, a similar gastralic pumping mechanism is found in modern-day sea serpents as well as worms, a species we'll be visiting shortly. One species that appeared around this time was Cur primopyrus. Fossils from present-day Eastern Africa indicate that it was around 0.9 to 1.2 meters long, making it larger than the majority of Permian draconomorphs, and was among the largest non-pariasaur parareptiles of its region. Compared to most of its stocky relatives, this taxon had a more elongated body, almost like a monitor lizard. In short, features like these indicate that Cur primopyrus may have been the first ever pyrosaurian, the group that
I mean, early Christians thought Romans were giants. I mean, anything could. Well, I'm tall people. If someone's a foot taller than you, I mean, yeah, they're gonna think you're a giant. I mean, my boyfriend's like a full foot taller than his brother's like fucking it's crazy how tall he's like 6'3" and he's the shortest man in his family. His brother's like 6'6", 6'7". Right? Like, tall people are different. They're different. Okay, I'm like 5'3" on a good day. No, I don't believe in like giants. Tall people, yeah, but not like giants.
that includes all modern dragons, drakes, and their fossil relatives. But if this species was a precursor, the pressing question is simple: did it breathe fire? Unfortunately, because the biological structures associated with fire breathing in pyrosaurians do not fossilize, it is impossible to know for sure.
You
If
don't
Cur
believe in
is
tall
indeed
people
the
either.
earliest pyrosaurian, then it's likely that it may have possessed a very primitive version of the trait. It wouldn't have been very effective for prey capture,
Tall people
but
are
it
a
would
lie.
have certainly made for an excellent defense against predators.
True
But
hero.
the true first
structures.
dragon wouldn't arrive on the scene.
That is true though. The Romans did build big friggin' doors and big spacious interiors. But they were just fancy. They were just super fancy. We could go into the whole history of the Romans and how they were or something else.
Seen until the end of the Triassic, or Draco-Onychopteryx. Interestingly though, as with the earliest known pterosaurs and bats, Draco is not by any means a transitional form. It possesses a number of derived features and is otherwise nearly indistinguishable from some modern
so
dragons.
cute.
With a 55-centimeter wingspan,
Oh my God.
Onychopteryx wasn't a particularly large animal and wouldn't have been much of a match for most predators in its ecosystem. However, in the future, its descendants would go on to conquer the Mesozoic with fire and blood. But now, dear traveler, we've arrived at our next destination. The last part of our journey included 2 pyrosaurian clades, drakes and true dragons. There is another branch from the fire breathers family tree, but we'll return to them in a little while. Before us now is a member of a clade of draconiforms also known as worms. In truth, the term worm refers to a number of basal draconiform reptiles, and not all taxa within this grouping are closely related. Indeed, similar to the eureptilian lizards, worms are paraphyletic and are considered more of an evolutionary grade rather than a single clade. Still, it's easy to see why these species were grouped this way. They all share numerous characteristics. Gliding gracefully through the skies above East and Southeast Asia is the muxianglong, a kind of flying worm. But their name is deceptive. Rather than adopting powered flight as some of their closest relatives did, flying worms are actually gliders. Measuring up to 1.8 meters in length, the muxianglong is the largest member of this particular clade, but its slender build and low weight allows it to glide from tree to tree by sucking in its abdomen, flaring out its ribs, and moving in a distinctly serpentine motion. Much like the flying snake, its body acts essentially as a parachute. Utilizing these impressive biological adaptations,
A wyvern compared to a dragon. Wyverns have 4 limbs, and the classical Western dragon has 6. So, a wyvern, its arms will be a part of the wing, and in the classical Western dragon, they have front legs, back legs, and separate wings.
the muxianglong is able to glide up to 120 meters at a time and can even make slight adjustments to its trajectory mid-flight. The fleshy tendrils on its head, hallmarks of this species' appearance in ancient illustrations, serve an as yet unknown purpose. But while many worms appear very snake-like indeed, nowhere is this similarity more striking than in Cerataspidae, also known as horned worms. This clade is so named because all of its 98 species possess.
I mean, the thing is that, like, they're all dragons, but a wyvern is a more specific thing to call it. Dragon is like an umbrella term, which is why you would still call an Eastern dragon a dragon. They're all dragons. Wyvern is just specific. Whereas, like, the 6-limbed ones, they call them Western, like, Western dragons. Wyvern is still a dragon. It's just not a Western one. Yeah, but they're all still dragons. That's the thing. They're still dragons. Yeah.
Some form of spiny cranial ornamentation. Interestingly, over half of these species are endemic to Atlantis, an archipelago that takes up a good chunk of the Atlantic between North America and Northern Africa. Like Lemuria, Atlantis doesn't exist in our reality, or at least not anymore. Our next species, however, is one of the 43 species of Cerataspidae that doesn't live on Atlantis. The greater banded Uctena is native to North America, and at up to 4.5 meters in length, it's one of the largest cerataspid species. Interestingly, while many of the dragons we visited previously are able to breathe fire for hunting and defense, many draconomorph species utilize venom, and the Uctena is no different. Among the parareptilian draconiforms, venom appears to have arisen on 3 separate occasions, once in the Ophiosuchia, once in the Samovermids, and once in a clade we'll be seeking out soon, Volcanosauria, or the wyverns. It's perhaps no surprise then that as the most diverse group of draconiforms, worms exhibit the greatest diversity of venom compositions and delivery mechanisms. In the greater banded Uctena, 2 glands produce slightly different substances that are injected separately via 2 pairs of long, hollow fangs. Each secretion seems to be capable of functioning independently as venom, but with slightly different effects, such as myotoxic and hemotoxic in this case, with the combined secretion inducing multiple forms of toxicity. In fact, while its venom isn't as toxic as that of some others, the high quantities the Uctena injects via its large venom glands have been known to fell animals as large as bison and young mammoths. It seems likely that, at
bison
least
are
in some
scary.
capacity, this dragon made its way into the mythology of the Cherokee people, whose legends tell of a great snake the size of a tree trunk, with horns on its head and scales glowing like sparks of fire. But while the first worm we observed, the muxianglong, has no venom, and the Uctena has a less toxic but high-dose venom, our journey will now take us to the Gobi Desert, where a very unusual worm can be found, and one that possesses the most deadly venom of any of the draconomorphs.
I mean, to be fair, Win, this kind of stuff is just fun. People like to imagine stuff. So, like, it's like buying a book, you know? Or like a video game. so that you have something fun to think about or experience.
Ulgoi korkoi, also known as the deathworm, is difficult to find. We approach this desert at dusk as the heat of the day gradually dissipates. Keep your eyes focused on the sand, dear traveler, and you might see an unusual shifting just before a 2.5-meter worm erupts from beneath it. As you might have guessed, the deathworm is a sand swimmer. As such, its head is triangular and distinctively shark-like in profile, its forelimbs are nearly vestigial, and its hind limbs have disappeared altogether. By burrowing deep under the sand where temperatures are more stable, it can survive the heat of the day and the cold of the night, a crucial necessity for an ectotherm. But as previously mentioned, the deathworm is also notable for its extremely potent venom, perhaps most comparable to that of the Australian inland taipan. Venom is synthesized in a pair of venom glands located just behind the eyes, which are encased in a muscular sheath, allowing for precise control over venom delivery. Venom is then injected via 3 pairs of fixed hollow fangs, similar to those of snakes. When threatened, though, the deathworm is quite reluctant to bite, and will instead spit stomach acid at the aggressor as a deterrent. But if this fails to dissuade a predator, it will strike. But among the draconiforms, worms aren't the only venomous beasts to be found. The next leg of our journey will take us to the island of New Guinea, where we'll find the largest species of wyvern. This part of the trip will take some time, and as we make our way across this world of dragons, you could pass the time by streaming a mind-numbing TV show, or you could spend your downtime discovering a new passion or honing a skill. This video is sponsored by Wondrium, an online platform where you find the answer to everything you've ever wondered about and some things you've never imagined you would wonder about. Their carefully curated collection of long and short form videos, tutorials, how-tos, travelogues, documentaries, and more is academically comprehensive, thoroughly researched, relentlessly entertaining, and presented by engaging experts.
Yo, I want to watch Cooking Better with Science.
Than expanding my knowledge of a particular subject, especially when it's presented in a fun and engaging way. And no platform that I've found does it better than Wondrium.
Yo, that's
I
cool.
recently watched a course called Black Holes, Tides, and Curved Spacetime: Understanding Gravity, presented by a renowned professor of physics. And let me tell you, I've never had such a complex topic broken down so clearly without oversimplifying it. For example, I learned that there are gaps in our solar system's asteroid belt caused by something called orbital resonance with the giant planet Jupiter, and this exact same effect can be observed in the rings of Saturn. But if you're like me, your interests are wide and varied. Fortunately, Wondrium adds new content every single month, so finding new and unexpected ways to learn and grow couldn't be easier. This month, for example, they're launching a 15-part series called In the Footsteps of Historical Jesus, which will dive deeper into Jesus' life from birth to resurrection. Plus, you can access Wondrium from just about any streaming device, and you can even download a course to listen to like a podcast. So if you want to check out Wondrium for yourself, now's your chance. They're generously offering my viewers a free trial. Just visit wondrium.com/thoughtpotato or click the link in the description below to start your free trial today.
See, the one thing about these, though, that sucks, unless you have a VPN, if you live in Canada, you get, like, no content. Like, what was it called? What was it called? There is another, it wasn't Wondrium, it was, another service that had a bunch of documentaries and stuff, but because I'm in Canada, it had like fucking nothing on it, because legally here in Canada, 30% of the content on everything, like streaming services, has to be Canadian, so they cut out a lot of other good shit. It sucks. Yo, being in Canada fucking sucks. I hate Canada. For entertainment, fucking sucks. It's so bad. Like, you want to go camping? Yeah, this is the place. It is a weird rule. They're like, you gotta give Canadian creators a chance. I'm like, yeah, we'll just make good content. People will watch it. Why you gotta do stupid shit like that? 30% has to be Canadian? Oh, it's so dumb. It is so dumb. I hate it. Who's doing stupid shit? Canada. Come fight all of Canada then. Kitty, welcome back. Oh man. It's so bad.
Now, dear traveler, we are approaching this world's next fascinating offering. The Velanosauria, or wyverns as they're more commonly known, are flying reptiles, but despite their superficial similarity to dragons, they are more closely related to certain worms. Still, this very diverse clade, made up of over 130 known species, differs in many ways from their cousins, especially dragons. For one, wyverns have tetradactyl forelimbs and tridactyl hindlimbs. Digits 3 and 4 of their forelimbs are elongated, with 4 being the longest, and supporting the patagium. This lacks the extensive musculature or air sacs seen in dragon patagia, and instead is supported by keratinous rods that run longitudinally. This makes wyvern wings much stiffer than those of dragons, in turn making walking on all fours somewhat cumbersome.
Pretty
But
much so,
because the
yeah.
legs are independent of the wings, most wyverns are facultatively bipedal, giving them the ability to stand or run on their legs should they find themselves grounded. As we observe the New Guinean giant wyvern, the first thing you're certain to notice is that while it is indeed the largest of its clade, it's relatively small compared to some other creatures we've seen so far. Why? Well, while wyverns do have air spaces in some of their larger bones and thinner bones overall, they lack the degree of skeletal pneumaticity seen in many related clades, which, in addition to competition with dragons and birds, ultimately restricts them to much smaller sizes. In fact, most grow no larger than a hawk. Still, with a 2.7 to 3 meter wingspan, the New Guinean giant wyvern is an impressive sight, and it's the top predator of its island habitat. This is largely due to the fact that New Guinea doesn't have many large animals which would support larger dragons. It manages to coexist with its main competitor, the Papuan eagle, by hunting mainly in the open highlands rather than the dense jungle, and at random intervals during the day or night, rather than during the eagle's strictly diurnal hunting habits. Speaking of hunting, wyverns generally prefer small to medium-sized prey, but on rare occasions, they have been known to tackle prey many times their size, such as cassowaries. They do this by biting the animal's neck and immediately retreating to avoid injury. Then they simply wait for its myo and hemotoxic venom to take effect, killing its victim by paralyzing the muscles necessary for breathing. Many wyverns exhibit fairly extreme sexual dimorphism, though it differs greatly between species. One of the best examples of this phenomenon can be found in a member of Avilacertidae, a diverse clade found mostly in neotropical regions. The peacock wyvern is found in the Amazon rainforest, and
cool.
like so many tropical birds found here, it exhibits some extravagant coloration. Males are bright blue with black markings and possess an elaborate fan-like crest of scales on their tails as well as a smaller crest on their heads. By comparison, females are a dull green and lack crests, though they do have similar black markings, and with a 1.5 meter wingspan are similar in size to the males.
Oh, they're so little,
Notably,
though.
peacock wyverns possessed what's probably the most potent venom of any known wyvern species in the world, with as little as 9 milligrams being sufficient to kill an adult human, and the wyvern may inject over 10 times this amount in a single bite. This toxicity is comparable to that of the Australian coastal taipan, one of the world's most toxic snakes. Now, dear traveler, we'll be leaving this part of the world. The next part of our search will take us back to the clade Draconia, and we'll be seeking out some of the most intriguing creatures we've yet seen. Distributed through Western Asia, North Africa, and Southern Europe, the common cockatrice is the first we've seen of one of the most magnificent of the pyrosaurians, Ornithodraconia. This clade is extremely diverse, with many subclades of vastly different morphologies. They are similar to their eudraconian cousins in many ways. Forelimbs modified into wings, hollow bones, well-developed senses, and an unusually high degree of intelligence for a reptile. But there are also many notable differences. Their wings are more rounded due to differing digital lengths, and their wings are also more flexible, allowing them to be folded more tightly, and thus making walking and running easier. While many true dragons can run just as fast, few can match the agility and grace of the Ornithodraconians on the ground. Among other differences, perhaps the most notable is that unlike the true dragons, Ornithodraconians have lost their ability to breathe fire. It's not clear why they would lose such a seemingly valuable trait, but considering that fire breathing among the pyrosaurians likely arose as a simple means of distraction rather than the devastating offensive weapon that the true dragons have modified it into, it's likely that for early Ornithodraconians, it proved too bioenergetically expensive to maintain. Clearly, these dragons bear a strong resemblance to birds, possessing thick, downy integument or coelofibers and pointed, sometimes curved beaks. With a 3-meter wingspan, the common cockatrice is similar in size to a large eagle or vulture, but at 4 to 5 kilograms, it weighs much less. Their heads are covered in a loose skin, which extends to most of their beak, except the very tip. Interestingly, the legends of these creatures, found in many medieval bestiaries, often described them as hatching from the egg of a chicken that was incubated by a toad. This myth has some truth to it, as these reptiles actually lay their eggs in burrows dug out by certain species of burrowing toads and lizards.
Oh, I love
An
toads.
even more
They're
interesting
so
mythical
cute.
attribute claimed that it had the ability to kill people by either looking at them, touching them, or sometimes breathing on them. As the cockatrice's spitting attack is known to be especially harsh and irritating, and as this species has a particular penchant for aiming at an aggressor's eyes, it's likely that these abilities were conflated to become the death glare they are erroneously known for.
That sounds
Now, though,
horrible.
we'll be traveling once more, but once again, we won't have to go far. Keep your eyes peeled, dear traveler, not to the sky, but to the ground, where our next species spends more of its time. The Ophiuchus is a member of Griffonidae, the second of the two families under Ornithodraconidae, and what
I
are
like
commonly
them.
known as griffins. Griffins have much larger beaks and a keratinous sheath that covers much of their rostrum, and in most species, a strongly hooked beak tip that gives them a distinctive, raptor-like head. Interestingly, this hooked tip is actually a keratin-covered premaxillary tooth. While all known species of dragon possess this egg tooth as embryos and hatchlings, these are normally lost fairly quickly. But in griffins, this trait is retained well into adulthood and modified to serve as a weapon.
Cool.
As previously mentioned, Ophiuchus spend more of their
Thylacine?
time hunting from the ground than from the air, feeding on small prey such as rodents and birds as well as deer fawns and carrion. In medieval times, the Ophiuchus was used as a heraldic variant of the griffin, often erroneously depicted with all four legs being those of a lion. But there is a different kind of griffin that is quite unlike anything we've seen before. To find it, we must return to the great island of Lemuria. Here, we'll find the largest species of pteroceratid ornithodraconian, the alicorn, or flying
The
unicorn.
alicorn.
With a wingspan of up to 8 meters, it is an impressive size to be sure. But perhaps
Aye, bronies. Here's your chance. It's the alicorn.
the most notable aspect of this dragon's appearance is, of course, the large horn protruding from the top of its head. These horn crests, which are actually made up of a single upward-pointing horn and a backward-pointing prong fringed by a crown of smaller horns, have a bony core that is covered by a keratinous sheath.
You called yourself out.
The size and shape of these crests play an important role in alicorn relations and in determining individual hierarchy.
It's alright, I
These
watched
horn
the first,
crests
like, 3
also make
seasons or
excellent
something.
weapons.
It's pretty good.
As well as fighting each other, alicorns use their horns for defense, often with devastating effects. Threatened alicorns will launch themselves directly at their attacker. A direct hit from an alicorn's horn can cause severe, even fatal injury to predators as large as themselves, and even larger dragons have been killed by defensive alicorns. But as fascinating as the alicorn is, a winged reptile doesn't exactly fit the traditional image of a unicorn. To find a species that could have spawned those legends, we'll now be traveling to Asia. Though horse-like in appearance, the Asian forest unicorn is not simply a horse with a horn. True unicorns have 3-toed feet, longer bodies, and lack a mane. Of course, a single large horn on their snout is the most obvious difference. This horn is actually formed from an extension of the frontal bone that is covered in a tough keratinous sheath. In this regard, they are similar to the horns of bovids, but are most similar to the bony horns of brontotheres. Indeed, this family of hippomorph perissodactyls appear to be the sister lineage to, or perhaps even descendants of, brontotheres. At just under 1.5 meters tall at the withers and weighing 250 to 300 kilograms, this species of unicorn isn't the largest, but it is perhaps the most well-known. As you might have guessed, unicorn horns make formidable weapons, and even predators as large as tigers and lions are often gored to death. This species even has a thicker frontal bone that appears to be specifically adapted to withstand hard impacts, allowing it to use its horn as a joust. Able to run at up to 50 kilometers an hour, even through fairly dense brush, forest unicorns will often charge headfirst at their attackers and inflict grievous injuries.
Ooh.
But even among these bizarre creatures, there is one even more unusual type of horned animal to discover. Resembling a large hare with shorter ears and a single large horn on its head,
Jackalope.
the almirage belongs to the Ceratolagidea, colloquially called jackalopes, a
Yeah.
family of lagomorphs endemic to Atlantis. Interestingly, the horns of this family appear to have resulted from a pathological condition.
Well, the first one
Genetic
went into, like,
studies show
mermaids
that
and
the genes
stuff.
responsible for horn growth are actually controlled oncogenes that are in turn derived from a kind of cancer-causing virus. It appears that at some point in the distant past, some individuals were infected with a papillomavirus, which resulted in the formation of keratinous tumors in infected individuals. Over time, the virus appears to have decreased in severity, resulting in the formation of smaller or less obstructive tumors than those with which these unfortunate individuals were forced to contend. Ultimately, the virus appears to have integrated itself into the host's genome, at which point the genes responsible for the tumors came under intense selection pressure. Eventually, instead of growing out of random points on the head, the tumors began to only develop at certain areas of the skin that are especially rich in keratin-producing cells, and typically stopped growing once reaching a certain stage. The Almirage's horn, which grows out of a single such patch of skin, normally grows to a length of 20 to 25 centimeters, quite large for an animal that is only 70 to 75 centimeters long. Almirage often scrape their horns against rough surfaces to wear them down, which makes it easier to use them as defensive weapons. Still, unlike many of their relatives such as jackalopes,
Looks like it was made in
Almirage
spore.
rarely use their horns during combat, instead preferring to box with their front paws, similar to hares.
Yeah, hares are wild.
And so, dear traveler, it is here that we must end our journey through this fascinating world. There is much more to discover here, but sadly, we'll have to save it for another time. Still,
Is there a
if
part
you'd like to
3?
learn more about the world of Draconology, be sure to visit Vicus Rao's DeviantArt page, where new
Oh, that's
research is
cool.
published frequently.
Oh, I like
Until
that.
next
That's
time,
cool.
thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, you matter.
I like this guy's channel. I love mythology, and I love fantasy, sci-fi type stuff. I think it's so fun. But then again, I also grew up, like, you know, playing video games and watching movies and reading books. So, I don't know. I like this guy's channel, though. I like him. Thought Potato. That's just a handle for you to hold as you boil it in a hot pot. True, that would make cooking that jackalope a lot easier. I don't know about that. Last time I searched for dragons on DeviantArt, came up with some weird shit. You know what? Fair enough. Fair enough.